Hello everybody, this is Professor Quine. This is the Spring 2014 and I am recording this webinar for my Ring 91 and 92 students. I am sure though that I will reuse this webinar in an upcoming semester because it's pretty classic information. This is kind of information that almost all students need to review at some point to remind them of all of the different kinds of sentence structures that are available to them to make their writing more sophisticated and more interesting. In the class, I have, and again I'm talking spring 2014, but I usually teach every class this way. I have already gone over independent clauses. Independent clauses consist of subjects and verbs and some end mark of punctuation, usually a period. They express a complete thought. They stand on their own because they express a complete thought. Some examples are I like to go to the movies. I love to go to the opera. You understand immediately what this person is talking about. You can see the subject and the verb I and like. To go is an infinitive. To the movies is a prepositional phrase. I and love a subject and verb. To go is an infinitive. To the opera is a prepositional phrase. If you don't know what those terms mean, you need to go back to those webinars and review that information because it's important that you be able to break a sentence down in that way. Okay, so those are independent clauses. The compound sentence demonstrates the principle of coordination, and I have again already done a webinar on this, so go back and look at the webinar if you want more information on compound sentences. But just an overview, it demonstrates the principle of coordination. It consists of two independent clauses joined together, but that you can't join just any two independent clauses together. They have to be of equal importance and close in meaning. And that's what coordination means. They have to be of equal importance and close in meaning. So if you look at these two independent clauses that we were going over up here, you can see what they have to do with one another. This is somebody talking about things that they like to do. Both equally important, so you could join them together either with method 1, meaning a comma and a fanboy, or method 2, a semicolon conjunctive adverb, comma. Again, the fanboy is a for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. The conjunctive adverbs, there are several of them. Examples are however, therefore, in addition, moreover, furthermore, loads of them. Go back and look at that webinar and you'll learn more about those. But anyway, so here are the two methods. Here's method 1. I like to go to the movies, comma, but I love to go to the opera. And then here is method 2. I like to go to the movies, semicolon, however, comma, I love to go to the opera. So you see a little comparison. This person likes to do one thing but really loves to do something else. So that's how you would form those compound sentences. Now we're moving on to complex and compound complex sentences. Specifically in Ring 91, I think we stop with the complex sentence. And then we pick up from there in Ring 92, and we take you through compound complex. So anyway, in order to know the compound complex, you have to understand complex sentences. They demonstrate the principle of subordination, not coordination, subordination. So subordination, sub meaning one thing isn't as important as the other. And the thing that's not as important is the dependent clause, something that I abbreviate with a DC. Dependent clauses are not as important as the independent clause. Why is that? Because the dependent clause does not express a complete thought. If you leave the dependent clause all by itself, it's a fragment, okay? So that's the big thing about dependent clauses. Many dependent clauses are adverb clauses, not all, but many of them are adverb clauses. And adverb clauses have a subject and verb in them. It doesn't make them a sentence though, because they don't stand on their own. But they always begin with something called a subordinator. And here are some examples of subordinators: after, although, as if. You can read all of those there, okay? So those are some examples. It's certainly not all of the adverb clause subordinators, but that's some of the most popular ones. Okay, so here's an example of a complex sentence using the independent clauses that we were exploring before. I'm going to subordinate one of them, and the one I'm going to subordinate is the I like to go to the movies one. So I'm going to make that the less important clause. I'll make that a dependent clause. And how will I do that? Well, I'm going to use a subordinator at the very beginning, and the one that I'm going to use is the word although. Okay, so I'm going to put although in front. I do although I like to go to the movies, I love to go to the opera. Now, if I walked up to you and I said, although I like to go to the movies, I haven't expressed a complete thought, right? The completion of that thought is dependent upon the independent clause. Although I like to go to the movies, I love to go to the opera. Do you see how I just completed the thought? Now notice that when you put the dependent clause at the beginning of the sentence, before the independent clause, you separate the two with a comma. Do you see that comma there right after movies? But if you construct a complex sentence with the dependent clause going behind the independent clause, you don't use a comma. So let me show you something. Here's a nice site that I found on adverb clauses. It's got a strange name, chompchomp.com. But anyway, here it is. Recognizing an adverb clause when you see one. It will contain a subject and verb. Subordinate conjunction is what they call it. I call them subordinators. We'll keep, the first word of the sentence. The first word of the dependent clause. And we'll answer one of these three adverb questions: how, when, or why. Read these examples. This person says, Tommy scrubbed the bathroom tile until his arm ached. Well, until is a subordinator of a adverb clause, of a dependent clause. So how did Tommy scrub? Until his arm ached. So notice that we've placed the dependent clause, the adverb clause there, behind the independent clause. So we don't use a comma in that case, all right? Another one, Josephine's three cats bolted from the driveway once they saw her car turn the corner. When did the cats bolt? Once they saw her car turn the corner. And again, we have that adverb clause, that dependent clause, after the independent clause, so we don't use a comma to separate them. Now, look at this one. After her appointment at the orthodontist, Danielle cooked eggs for dinner because she could easily chew an omelet. Why did Danielle cook eggs? Because she could easily chew, because she could easily chew an omelet. Now this actually has two dependent clauses. The answer to the question, why did Danielle cook eggs, is because she could easily chew an omelet. And that dependent clause, that adverb clause, is at the end of the sentence. And so we do not use a comma. Students really struggle with this. They want to put a comma before because, and you don't use one. Now, notice that here's another adverb clause right here, after her appointment at the dentist. That dependent clause goes at the beginning, or was placed at the beginning of the sentence before the independent clause. So that's why we have a comma right there. Okay, so if you put your dependent clause before the independent clause, you use a comma. If you put it behind the independent clause, you do not use a comma. So now let's move on to compound complex sentence. Compound complex sentences demonstrate the concepts of both subordination and coordination. Here's they have two equations. You can do an independent clause plus an independent clause plus a dependent clause, or a dependent clause plus independent clause plus independent clause. So here are some examples. Let's say I have the dependent clause, because I was sick. That's an adverb clause, right? Then I have an independent clause, I did not go to work on Monday, and another another independent clause, I did not go to class on Monday. So I could come up with this sentence, because I was sick. Now notice that this is my adverb clause, my dependent clause at the beginning of the sentence. Okay, because I was sick, I did not go to work on Monday, comma, and I did not go to class on Monday. Now notice this part is your compound sentence, right? Here is independent clause 1, and here is independent clause 2. They're coordinate, they have something to do with one another, and I've joined them method 1, comma, and. What I put in front is that adverb clause, that dependent clause, because I was sick. All right. So there's an example of a compound complex sentence. Okay. Now let's try something else. Let's see if we can come up with another one. Let's say that I have this independent clause. Wait a minute. Let me go ahead and list out some things here. And here's a dependent clause. Let's see, I like to study math. I like to study science. Let me change this. I'm going to change my tense there for a second. I think it will make more sense. There you go. Now, obviously you can see a relationship between those two independent clauses, and I think most of us can see how you would place the dependent clause. I would probably put this dependent clause at the beginning. First thing I would do is decide how I want to compound. Maybe I would do a comma and. Maybe let's make it even more sophisticated. Let's use a method 2 compound there. So here we go. I've made a compound sentence out of those two independent clauses, right? Now I've got a choice. Let's see if this will work. Do I want to put the dependent clause at the end? I would like to study math. In addition, I would like to study science when I go to college. I think that would be okay. Or I could say when I go to college, comma, I would like to study math, semicolon, in addition, comma, I would like to study science. Okay? And I'm going to get rid of that when I go to college because I've already placed that at the beginning. So there's another example for you. Okay? So that's a wrap on compound complex sentences and a bit of a review on independent clauses and compound and complex sentences. So I hope you found this helpful, and I will be talking to you soon. Goodbye.